The silent ship drifted through the upper atmosphere of Terrax 9, its cloaking systems rendering it invisible to both the primitive tracking stations below and the natural predators that soared through the acidic clouds. Inside the vessel's command center, Sex Valdor studied the holographic display with cold, analytical eyes. Night Whisper, the ship's AI intoned in its characteristically emotionless voice. We have achieved optimal positioning above target location. Sex didn't respond immediately. His attention remained fixed on the sprawling compound below. Academy 15 Beta, one of the most peculiar educational facilities in the known galaxy. Built on a Class 15 Deathworld, the Academy specialized in what its founders called cross-species harmonization education. To Sex, it sounded like suicide with extra steps. "Show me the target profile again," he finally said, his voice barely audible above the ship's ambient hum. The hologram shifted, displaying the image of a woman with striking features, bright blue eyes that seemed to radiate warmth even through the digital projection. Auburn hair, pulled back in a practical bun, and a smile that somehow managed to convey both gentleness and determination. Target: Aurora Vale. Night Whisper recited. Title: Doctor of Xenopsychology, specializing in developmental approaches for highly aggressive species. Current position: kindergarten instructor at Academy 15 Beta. Threat assessment: catastrophic. Sex raised an eyebrow. Catastrophic? She's a kindergarten teacher. According to the contract parameters, Subject Vale has demonstrated unprecedented success in pacifying Class 15 lifeforms. The client classifies this as a fundamental threat to galactic security protocols. The assassin studied the woman's face more carefully. In 15 years as the galaxy's most feared contract killer, he'd eliminated politicians, warlords, crime bosses, and rival assassins. But a kindergarten teacher? That was a first. Contract value? He asked. 5 million universal credits, triple your standard fee. Sex whistled softly. Someone powerful wanted this woman dead, badly. Prepare my infiltration gear, he commanded, rising from his chair. I'll verify the threat assessment personally before execution. As he walked toward the equipment bay, Sex couldn't shake a feeling of unease. In his line of work, curiosity was a liability. Targets were targets, not puzzles to solve. Yet something about this contract felt off. The Academy's security systems were impressive for an educational facility, but laughably inadequate for someone of Sex's caliber. Within 20 minutes of landing his stealth pod in the dense, predator-filled jungle surrounding the compound, he had bypassed 3 sensor grids, neutralized a patrol droid, and slipped into the ventilation system. Moving silently through the metal ducts, Sex navigated toward the kindergarten wing. According to the Academy's schedule, Dr. Vale would be conducting her morning session with what the staff euphemistically called integration candidates, juvenile specimens of the planet's most lethal native species. The vent above classroom K7 offered a perfect vantage point. Sex positioned himself carefully, activating his optical enhancers to peer through the grate. What he saw below made him freeze. Dr. Aurora Vale stood in the center of a brightly decorated classroom, surrounded by creatures that featured prominently in the nightmares of even the most hardened space travelers. A juvenile thunder raptor, its electricity-generating spines already capable of delivering a lethal charge, sat attentively beside a pair of acid-spitting marsh vipers. In the corner, a shadow leech, a predator that could phase through solid matter to feed on neural energy, appeared to be coloring with crayons. Most shockingly, 3 human children sat among these lethal creatures, showing not the slightest sign of fear. Today, Dr. Vale announced with a smile that somehow encompassed every being in the room equally. We're going to learn about sharing. Sex blinked in disbelief. Sharing? With creatures evolutionarily designed to kill and consume anything that moved. Sharing is how we show others that we care about their needs, the teacher continued. When we share, we build trust, and trust is the foundation of friendship. The assassin watched as Vale demonstrated, by breaking a strange, glowing fruit into pieces and distributing them among the diverse group of students. To his astonishment, the deadly creatures accepted their portions with what could only be described as gentleness, some using appendages clearly not evolved for delicate manipulation. Vazik, Vale addressed the Thunder Raptor. I notice you received a smaller piece. How does that make you feel? The creature emitted a series of clicks and growls that should have been threatening, but somehow sounded plaintive. I understand, Vale nodded, as if the sounds made perfect sense. It's natural to feel disappointed. Would anyone like to help Vazik with this problem? A human girl, no more than 5 years old, raised her hand. I can share some of mine, Teacher Aurora. Sex nearly lost his grip on the vent grate. Was the child suicidal? Thunder Raptors were known to eviscerate adults for merely making eye contact. Yet, as he watched, the girl calmly broke off a portion of her fruit and offered it to the predator, who accepted it with what appeared to be gratitude. Beautiful example. Mira, Vale beamed. Everyone, what did we just witness? Empathy, chorused several voices, including, impossibly, the gurgling vocalization of the marsh vipers. Sex remained motionless, his mind racing. Was this some form of mind control? Advanced behavioral modification? He scanned Vale for technology, but his sensors detected nothing beyond standard teaching tools and a simple medical kit on her belt. For nearly an hour, he observed as Vale guided the lethal students through exercises in cooperation, communication, and conflict resolution. When the shadow leech accidentally phased through another creature's art project, Vale turned it into a lesson about respecting boundaries. When two marsh vipers hissed aggressively over a toy, she helped them negotiate a solution rather than imposing one. Not once did she raise her voice or resort to discipline. Not once did she show fear, even when the Thunder Raptor's spines briefly flared with electricity during a moment of excitement. As the class broke for what Vale called exploration time, Sex retreated deeper into the ventilation system, his thoughts in turmoil. This wasn't what he'd expected. The dossier had described Vale as manipulating dangerous species for unknown purposes and undermining natural order. But what he'd witnessed looked more like education, genuine, compassionate education. For the next 3 days, Sex observed Vale's classes, moving between ventilation shafts and hidden observation points around the academy. He watched her teach everything from basic mathematics, using local predators as counting examples, to rudimentary ethics, focusing on concepts like hunting only what you need and respecting other beings' territories. On the 4th day, his perspective shifted dramatically during what Vale called healing circle. Today, she announced to her unusual class, we have a special visitor who needs our help. 2 academy staff members entered, carefully transporting a containment field that held a juvenile specimen of one of Terax 9's apex predators, a spine-backed terror, locally known as a death whisper for its ability to mimic prey vocalizations. The creature was clearly injured, with a deep gash across its armored hide and one of its 4 eyes swollen shut. This young one was found trapped in an abandoned mining pit, Vale explained, her voice gentle. She's frightened and in pain. What do we do when we encounter someone who's suffering? Help them, came the unified response from her students. Sex watched in astonishment as Vale guided the children, both human and alien, through the process of treating the injured predator. She lowered the containment field gradually, speaking soothingly to the creature. When it lunged aggressively, she didn't flinch or retreat. I know you're scared, she said, maintaining eye contact with the beast. Pain makes us all want to lash out, but we're here to help, not harm. Somehow, whether through her tone, body language, or some deeper connection Sex couldn't comprehend, the message seemed to reach the creature. It remained tense, but allowed Vale to approach and begin treating its wounds. Mira, would you bring the healing gel, please? Vazik, your gentle claws would be perfect for holding the bandage. The children and juvenile predators worked together under Vale's guidance, each contributing to the healing process. When the death whisper growled in pain as Vale cleaned its wound, she acknowledged its suffering rather than scolding it. I know it hurts, she said. Sometimes healing does hurt, but the pain is temporary, and it helps us grow stronger. By the end of the session, the injured predator was resting peacefully, its wounds treated and bandaged. More remarkably, it had allowed the Thunder Raptor to sit beside it, the two natural enemies sharing space without hostility. As the class dispersed for their midday meal, Sex remained hidden, his mind wrestling with implications that threatened the foundation of his worldview. In 15 years of eliminating targets across the galaxy, he'd operated under a simple premise. Some beings represented threats that could only be neutralized through permanent removal. Yet, here was Vale, neutralizing threats through understanding, compassion, education. The concepts felt foreign in his mind, like words from a language he'd never bothered to learn. That night, aboard his cloaked ship, Sex reviewed the contract details more carefully. The client, identified only through encrypted channels as a representative of something called the Galactic Stability Initiative, had emphasized Vale's dangerous influence and subversive methodologies. Computer, he said, search for information on the Galactic Stability Initiative. No official records found, Night Whisper replied. Unofficial sources suggest a shadow organization with connections to military-industrial complexes across 17 systems, rumored to promote aggressive species management policies and resistance to integration efforts. Sex frowned. Define aggressive species management. Containment, exploitation, or elimination of species deemed incompatible with galactic civilization. The pieces began to align in a disturbing pattern. Vale wasn't threatening galactic security. She was threatening a particular vision of how the galaxy should be ordered, one that apparently required fear, separation, and occasional genocide to maintain. Interesting, he murmured. The next morning, Sex returned to his observation post above classroom K7, his resolve wavering for the first time in his professional career. As Vale's students filed in, the deadly assortment of predators and children now familiar to him, he noticed a new addition, the Death Whisper from yesterday's healing session, now wearing a protective covering over its injured eye, but otherwise moving comfortably among the others. Friends, Vale announced, Shira has decided to join our learning community. Let's show her how we welcome new classmates. What followed was a simple ritual where each student offered a welcome gesture appropriate to their species. A human handshake, a thunder raptor's gentle head bob, the marsh viper's ceremonial coil display. The Death Whisper responded awkwardly at first, then with increasing confidence as it realized no threat was forthcoming. The day's lesson focused on problem-solving, with Vale dividing the class into mixed species groups and presenting them with challenges that required cooperation. Sex watched as natural predators and prey worked side by side, their evolutionary impulses temporarily overridden by something more powerful: shared purpose. When we face problems together, Vale explained, moving between groups, we discover solutions that none of us could find alone. Each of you brings different strengths and different ways of seeing. One particular moment caught Sex's attention. A human boy had become frustrated with a puzzle and shoved it away, accidentally hitting the shadow leech. Instead of attacking, as its instincts would normally dictate, the creature produced a sound Sex had never associated with its species, a soft, questioning trill. I'm sorry, the boy said immediately, his response appearing completely natural rather than fearful. I got angry, but I shouldn't have pushed it. Excellent recognition, Tomas, Vale nodded. And how can you make this right? The boy thought for a moment. I can ask if Keithy is okay, and then ask if they still want to work on the puzzle with me. Vale smiled. That sounds like an excellent plan. Sex had seen enough. This wasn't brainwashing or manipulation. It was transformation. Vale wasn't subjugating these deadly creatures. She was offering them alternatives to their instinctual behaviors, choices, possibilities. As the children and creatures filed out for their outdoor activity period, Sex made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He needed to speak with Aurora Vale. The opportunity came sooner than expected. As Vale remained behind to organize materials for the afternoon session, Sex heard a commotion outside. Peering through a window, he saw one of the human children, Mira, the girl who had shared her fruit with the Thunder Raptor, wandering dangerously close to the perimeter fence. Beyond it lay the unforgiving jungle of Terrax 9, teeming with adult versions of the predators being taught in the academy. More alarmingly, something was moving in the undergrowth just beyond the fence, something large, with the distinctive silhouette of a mature death whisper. The apex predator had clearly detected the child and was maneuvering for an ambush. Without conscious thought, Sex burst from his hiding place, sprinting across the academy grounds. He reached Mira just as the death whisper lunged, its massive form crashing against the energy barrier of the fence. The barrier held, but flickered ominously, a clear indication of imminent failure. "Get back to the building," Sex ordered, pushing the wide-eyed child behind him as he drew his disruptor pistol. The death whisper roared in frustration, its 4 eyes fixed on the prey that had been snatched from its grasp. It began testing the barrier systematically, an unsettling display of intelligence. "Sir, you need to move away from the fence." The voice came from behind him. Sex didn't need to turn to know it was Vale. Her distinctive accent had become familiar over days of observation. What he didn't expect was the complete lack of fear in her tone. She sounded authoritative, confident. "The barrier's failing," he replied, keeping his eyes on the predator. "This thing breaks through. We're both dead." "Not necessarily," Vale said, now standing beside him. She had positioned herself between him and Mira, her posture protective yet relaxed. "Though I'd appreciate it if you'd lower your weapon. It's agitating our visitor." "Our visitor is trying to eat us," Sex pointed out. "She's trying to feed her young," Vale corrected, gesturing toward the undergrowth where Sex now noticed several smaller shapes moving. This territory was her hunting ground long before we built the academy. From her perspective, we're the aggressors. The death whisper snarled, striking the barrier again. This time, the energy field visibly rippled. "Mira," Vale said calmly, "please go inside and tell Security Officer Jax that we have a code green at the south perimeter. Can you do that?" The little girl nodded solemnly and ran toward the main building. Sex kept his weapon trained on the death whisper, though he noted with confusion that Vale seemed completely unconcerned by the immediate danger. "You can put that away," she said, nodding toward his disruptor. "It won't help and might make things worse." "That barrier fails, you'll want me armed," he insisted. Vale regarded him curiously, as if truly seeing him for the first time. "You're not academy staff? Military? No. Private security, perhaps?" The death whisper roared again, this time managing to force a clawed limb partially through the flickering barrier. "We don't have time for introductions," Sex snapped. "That thing breaks through. I'm shooting it. Your philosophical objections are noted and ignored." To his surprise, Vale laughed, a bright, genuine sound completely at odds with their perilous situation. "Oh, I have no philosophical objection to defending ourselves," she said. "I object because your weapon is unnecessary and potentially harmful to our educational mission." Before Sex could respond, Vale turned toward the raging predator and produced a small, flute-like instrument from her pocket. She played a series of notes, a simple, repeating pattern that made no musical sense to Sex's ears. The effect on the death whisper was immediate and stunning. The creature froze, its aggressive posture melting into something that looked almost attentive. Vale continued playing, gradually modifying the pattern. The Death Whisper tilted its massive head, its primary hunting eyes narrowing while its secondary sensory eyes widened. After perhaps 30 seconds, Vale lowered the instrument and spoke directly to the creature in its own language, a series of clicks, growls, and subsonic rumbles that Sex could feel in his chest cavity. The Death Whisper responded with similar sounds, though noticeably less aggressive. "She's agreed to withdraw," Vale explained, switching back to Standard Galactic. "I've explained that we'll adjust the barrier to leave a hunting corridor along this section of the perimeter. Her young are hungry, and this is the most direct route to the river plains." Sex stared at her in disbelief. "You negotiated with that?" "With her," Vale corrected gently. "And yes, Death Whispers are highly intelligent, though their intelligence doesn't align with our traditional metrics. They understand territory, resources, and mutual benefit." As if to confirm her words, the Death Whisper backed away from the fence, making a final vocalization that sounded almost respectful. It disappeared into the dense foliage, its young following behind. Vale turned to Sex, her expression now serious. "Now, I believe we have our own negotiation to conduct. You've been observing my class for 4 days. If you wanted to understand our educational approach, you could have simply asked for a tour." Sex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's climate. "How long have you known that someone was watching? Since the first day? That it was you specifically? Since you moved between observation points yesterday afternoon? The ventilation system creates distinct echo patterns." She studied him with those remarkable blue eyes, her gaze neither hostile nor fearful, merely curious and perhaps slightly disappointed. "What I haven't determined," she continued, "is why the galaxy's most notorious assassin is interested in a kindergarten class on a backwater planet." It was Sex's turn to be surprised. "You know who I am?" Sex Valdor, known in some circles as the Inevitable. Before that, you operated under the alias Final Equation in the Outer Rim territories. She shrugged at his startled expression. "I have an excellent memory for faces, even ones that appear only briefly in security bulletins." Security officers were approaching from the main building, but Vale waved them back with a reassuring gesture. "So," she said, turning her full attention to Sex, "shall we discuss why you're here to kill me? Or would you prefer to maintain the pretense a while longer?" Sex's hand tightened on his disruptor. The logical move, the professional move, would be to complete the contract now. Vale knew his identity. The security team was still distant. A clean shot, a quick extraction to his ship, and he'd be off-world before anyone could react. Instead, he found himself holstering his weapon. "How did you know," he asked, "that you're here to kill me?" "I didn't, until just now when you confirmed it." Her smile was gentle but knowing. "Though I've suspected someone might make the attempt eventually. My work challenges certain powerful interests." "The Galactic Stability Initiative," Sex stated. Vale's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of surprise she'd shown. "You've done your research." "Yes, though they operate under many names. Organizations that profit from fear, separation, and conflict tend to dislike educational approaches that promote harmony." Security officers had reached them now, their weapons drawn and aimed at Sex. "Dr. Vale," the lead officer began, "step away from—" "It's all right, Officer Jax," Vale interrupted. "Our visitor saved Mira from potential harm. He deserves our gratitude, not our suspicion." Jax looked skeptical. "Ma'am, this individual is not authorized." "I'm authorizing him now," Vale said firmly. "In fact, I'm inviting him to observe this afternoon's class. As a guest." The security team exchanged bewildered glances, but lowered their weapons. Vale turned back to Sex, her expression unreadable. "Will you accept my invitation? One class. After that, you can decide whether to complete your contract or not." It was madness. Every professional instinct Sex had developed over 15 years as an assassin screamed that this was a trap. Yet, he found himself nodding. "One class," he agreed. Vale's classroom looked different from inside. The cheerful decorations Sex had observed from the ventilation shaft resolved into detailed educational materials, anatomical diagrams of various species, illustrated guides to communication signals, and maps showing ecosystem relationships. What had appeared to be simple finger paintings were actually sophisticated representations of emotional states across different species. The students, both human and Terrax native, regarded Sex with curious, but not fearful expressions as Vale introduced him. "Friends, this is Mr. Valdor. He helped keep Mira safe when she wandered too close to the perimeter. He'll be observing our class today." A chorus of welcomes followed, ranging from human voices to the various clicks, hisses, and trills of the native predators. The thunder raptor, Vazik, approached Sex directly, executing the head bob greeting he'd observed earlier. "Vazik says thank you for protecting his friend," Vale translated. "Thunder raptors value loyalty to one's social group above all other virtues." Sex found himself nodding awkwardly to the juvenile predator, unsure how to respond to gratitude from a creature he'd been taught to fear. "Today," Vale announced to the class, "we're learning about choices, about how the actions we take shape not only our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us." She gestured for Sex to take a seat near her desk. As he sat, feeling absurdly large in the child-sized chair, Vale began a lesson that seemed suspiciously relevant to his current dilemma. "Every day, we make choices," she explained. "Some are small, like what to eat for breakfast. Others are big, like whether to help someone in danger, or whether to continue doing something just because it's what we've always done." The children and juvenile predators watched attentively as Vale illustrated her points with examples tailored to each species' experience. Food selection for the marsh vipers, territory marking for the thunder raptor, energy conservation for the shadow leech. "The most important choices," she continued, "are the ones where we must decide between what is easy and what is right, between what others expect of us and what our own hearts tell us is true." Her gaze flicked briefly to Sex before returning to her students. "Sometimes, making the right choice means leaving behind an old way of being. It means becoming something new, something that perhaps we never imagined we could be." As the lesson progressed, Vale invited her students to share examples of difficult choices they had faced. Sex listened in growing amazement as deadly predators described choosing not to attack when provoked, or human children recounted moments of standing up to fear. The shadow leech, Keithy, produced a series of ethereal tones that Vale translated as a particularly poignant reflection on choosing connection over isolation. "Keithy says that shadow leeches normally feed alone and avoid others of their kind," Vale explained. "But here, she's learned that sharing experiences makes both the good and the bad more meaningful. She chose to join our community even though it went against her instincts." Throughout the afternoon, Sex observed, as Vale guided her unusual students through exercises in ethical decision-making, perspective-taking, and conflict resolution. Each activity seemed carefully designed to honor the evolutionary nature of each species, while gently expanding their behavioral repertoire. "We don't deny what we are," Vale explained during a quiet moment while the students worked on individual projects. "The thunder raptor will always generate electricity. The marsh vipers will always produce toxins. The shadow leech will always require neural energy. But we, can all choose how to use our natural abilities." "And the human children?" Sex asked, finding his voice. "Aren't you putting them at risk?" Vale's expression grew thoughtful. "Life is risk, especially on a Class 15 world. These children were born here. They'll inherit this planet with all its dangers and wonders. By learning alongside native species, they develop authentic understanding rather than reflexive fear. She gestured toward Mira, who was helping the injured Death Whisper with an art project. Those two are natural enemies according to every ecological study. Yet look at them now, creating together, learning from each other. It won't last, Sex argued, though without conviction. Once they mature, perhaps not, Vale acknowledged. Not for all of them. But even if only some retain this capacity for cross-species cooperation, it changes the future of this world. She fixed him, with a penetrating gaze. Just as our choices today shape the galaxy, our children will inherit. As the class concluded, and the students departed, each receiving a personalized farewell from Vale, Sex remained seated, his thoughts in turmoil. When the room had emptied, Vale pulled up a chair opposite him. "Have you decided?" she asked simply. Sex met her gaze. "You're remarkably calm for someone facing an assassin." "Death comes to us all eventually," she replied with a small shrug. "Though I admit, I'd prefer to continue my work a while longer." "Why?" The question escaped before Sex could stop it. "Why devote yourself to this? Teaching predators not to be predators. It goes against nature." Vale's expression softened. "I'm not teaching them not to be predators. I'm teaching them, and the human children, that being predatory is a capacity, not a destiny. That cooperation and empathy are evolutionary advantages too, just more subtle ones." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "The galaxy is full of species that evolved as apex predators on their homeworlds, humans included. If predation were our only option, we'd have destroyed ourselves long ago. Instead, we developed alternatives: cooperation, communication, community. These creatures," she gestured around the classroom, "possess far more potential than anyone has given them credit for. Not because I'm changing their nature, but because I'm offering them choices their evolutionary history never presented." Sex sat in silence, weighing her words against 15 years of professional detachment. Finally, he reached into his jacket and withdrew a small, metallic object, the encoded contract chip that contained both his assassination orders and payment authorization. "The Galactic Stability Initiative believes your work threatens the established order," he said, placing the chip on the table between them. "They're willing to pay 5 million credits to ensure it stops." Vale glanced at the chip but didn't touch it. "And what do you believe, Sex Valdor?" The question hung in the air between them, demanding an answer that would irreversibly alter his path. "I believe," he said slowly, "that I've never seen a mature Death Whisper back down without a fight, or a Thunder Raptor interact with prey without killing, or a Shadow Leech form social bonds." He met her gaze directly. "I believe you're doing something important here, something necessary." With a decisive gesture, he picked up the contract chip and crushed it between his fingers. "Contract declined," he stated. Vale's smile was like sunrise breaking over the Academy's protective dome. "I'm glad to hear it, though you realize they'll simply hire someone else." "Probably," Sex agreed. "Though I might have a solution for that, if you're interested." 2 weeks later, the Academy 15 beta staff roster updated to include a new position: security consultant and assistant instructor, Sex Valdor. The former assassin's transition wasn't seamless. Years of solitary existence and lethal purpose had left their mark on his psyche, just as surely as evolutionary pressures had shaped the predators of Terrax 9. Yet, under Vale's patient guidance, he discovered capacities within himself that had long lain dormant. His first official duty involved dismantling the tracking beacon hidden in the Academy's communication array, the one that would have guided his replacement to Vale. His second was implementing significantly enhanced security protocols, drawing on his intimate knowledge of assassination techniques. His third, and most challenging, was leading his first educational session. Today, he told the wide-eyed class of children and juvenile predators, we're learning about adaptation. Vale watched from the back of the room as Sex explained how all species must adapt to changing environments, sometimes through physical evolution, sometimes through behavioral innovation. The most successful beings, he said, drawing on his own recent experience, are those who can recognize when old strategies no longer serve them, who can look at a new situation and ask not, how do I make this fit what I already know, but rather, what must I become to thrive here? The students, particularly the predator species, seemed fascinated by this new instructor who carried himself with the focused alertness they recognized from their own hunting instincts. When Vazik, the thunder raptor, asked a question about adapting hunting techniques, Sex responded with surprising insight. Hunting is about understanding your target, he explained. About patience and observation. These skills are valuable for many purposes, not just taking life, but also protecting it. That evening, as they reviewed the day's lessons, Vale found Sex standing at the perimeter fence, gazing into the jungle beyond. Having second thoughts? She asked, joining him. No, he replied immediately, but adjusting. I spent 15 years defining myself by a singular purpose. Now that purpose is gone. Not gone, Vale corrected gently. Transformed. Like everything else on this planet. Sex turned to her, his expression unusually vulnerable. The Galactic Stability Initiative won't stop. They have resources, influence, and fear. Vale finished for him. Fear of change, of evolution, of possibilities they can't control. But fear is a poor foundation for lasting power. She gestured toward the academy buildings behind them, where lights glowed warmly in the gathering dusk. What we're building here, what you're now helping to build, is based on something stronger. Understanding, connection, choice. As if to underscore her point, a distant roar echoed from the jungle, the mature death whisper marking its territory. Within moments, a smaller answering call came from inside the academy. The juvenile death whisper, Shira, responding to her parent from the safety of her new community. They still communicate, Sex observed with surprise. Of course, Vale nodded. We don't sever connections here. We create new ones alongside the old. Shira will always be a death whisper, with all the instincts and abilities that entails. But she's also becoming something more, something that can move between worlds. The parallel to his own situation wasn't lost on Sex. And if she chooses to return to the jungle, to become what evolution designed her to be, then that too is her choice. Vale said simply, we offer possibilities, not prescriptions. The path each being walks must ultimately be their own. 6 months later, the galactic news feeds buzzed with an unusual announcement. The legendary assassin, known as the Inevitable, had officially retired. While most dismissed it as a publicity stunt or misdirection, those with connections to the shadowy world of contract killing knew better. Sex Valdor had disappeared completely from their networks. On Terex 9, life at Academy 15 Beta continued to evolve in unexpected ways. The experimental kindergarten program expanded to include older age groups, with Sex taking a leading role in what Vale termed advanced cross-species diplomacy, essentially teaching former enemies how to become allies. His methods were different from Vale's, more direct, sometimes stern, but equally effective. The Thunder Raptors in particular responded to his straightforward approach, and soon, a small group of adolescent specimens had formed something resembling a security auxiliary, patrolling the academy perimeter alongside human staff. More remarkably, word of the academy's success had begun to spread beyond Terex 9. Representatives from other Deathworld colonies arrived to observe Vale's methods, bringing reports of similar tensions between settlers and native species. Vale welcomed them all, while Sex quietly vetted each visitor to ensure the Galactic Stability Initiative hadn't infiltrated their ranks. On the one-year anniversary of his arrival at the academy, Sex found himself once again standing at the perimeter fence with Vale beside him, beyond the barrier. A significant change had occurred. A mixed group of mature death whispers and thunder raptors moved through the jungle in coordinated formation, natural enemies now hunting cooperatively. They learned from watching their young, Vale explained, her voice tinged with wonder and pride. The juveniles we've been teaching are influencing the behavior of their parents. Sex nodded, thinking of his own transformation. Adaptation works in both directions. The young learn from the old, but sometimes the old must learn from the young. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the hunting party disappear into the dense foliage. Finally, Vale spoke again. I received a message today. The Galactic Stability Initiative has disbanded, officially at least. Their principal financiers have withdrawn support, following some rather embarrassing data leaks about their true objectives. Sex maintained a neutral expression, though a hint of satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. How unfortunate for them. Indeed, Vale agreed, not pressing for details about his obvious involvement. Their headquarters has been repurposed as an interspecies cultural center, poetic in its way. Another silence, this one filled with unspoken acknowledgement of how far they had come, individually and together. You once asked me why I devoted myself to this work, Vale said softly. I never fully answered. Sex turned to her, waiting. My homeworld was classified as hostile, not a death world, but dangerous enough that the standard protocol was containment and resource extraction rather than integration. The native species were deemed incompatible with galactic civilization. Her voice took on a harder edge. A euphemism for acceptable to exploit. She looked out at the jungle, but her eyes seemed focused on something much farther away. I saw the same pattern repeating across dozens of worlds. Fear justifying control. Control enabling exploitation. I couldn't change galactic policy overnight, but I could prove the underlying assumption wrong. Show that even the most incompatible species could find common ground if approached with respect rather than fear. Sex considered her words. And me? Why risk everything by inviting an assassin into your classroom? Vale's smile returned, warming her features. Because you saved Mira. Because you hesitated when professional instinct told you not to. Because sometimes the most fearsome predators are simply beings who never learned they had other options. She turned to face him fully. Every life form in the galaxy evolved for survival, but survival strategies can change when environments change. What worked in the ancient past, aggression, dominance, solitary hunting, may not serve us in a connected future. As if to emphasize her point, a shadow leech floated past, accompanying a human student toward the academy gardens. The once solitary neural predator had adapted to feed on the ambient emotional energy of the academy's community, sustaining itself without harm to others. We're all learning together, Vale concluded, finding new ways to be what we are. Sex nodded, understanding at a level beyond words. He had come to Terax 9 as the galaxy's deadliest assassin, a solitary predator at the apex of his professional food chain. He had stayed as something else entirely, still skilled, still dangerous when necessary, but now part of something larger than himself. As they walked back toward the academy buildings, where classes would soon begin for another day, Sex reflected on the strange path that had led him here. One contract declined, one choice to listen rather than act, one opportunity to become something he had never imagined possible. Teacher Sex, called a small voice. Mira was running toward them, her face alight with excitement. The Death Whispers have started their migration pattern early. Can we observe from the South Tower? Of course, he replied, his formerly cold voice now warm with genuine affection. Bring your observation journal. This is an excellent opportunity to document adaptive behaviors. As the child raced ahead, Vale gave him a knowing look. Still adapting to being called teacher? Getting used to it, Sex admitted, though it's still strange to hear. No stranger than a kindergarten teacher neutralizing the galaxy's most feared assassin, Vale pointed out with a teasing smile. Sex laughed, a sound that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Not neutralized, just repurposed, for something more important than killing. Together, they followed Mira toward the observation tower, where students of various species were already gathering to witness the Death Whisper migration. As he looked at the eager faces, human and alien alike, Sex Valdor, former assassin and newly minted educator, felt something that had been missing throughout his previous life. Purpose, beyond mere survival. Connection. Belonging. The Academy. 15 Beta had begun as an experiment in cross-species education. It had become something far more significant. Proof that even on the deadliest worlds, in the most dangerous circumstances, transformation was possible, not through dominance or control, but through understanding and choice. As he began explaining migration patterns to his attentive students, Sex caught Vale's approving glance from across the observation deck. He nodded in acknowledgement, both of her and of the journey that had brought him here. From the galaxy's deadliest assassin to something he had never imagined possible. A teacher, guiding the next generation toward a future where ancient enemies could become allies, and where even the most lethal predators could choose a different path.